Good morning. I'm Sandy Scheller with the South Bay Historical Society and the Chula Vista Heritage Museum. I am with Iser Flaum, who wrote this amazing book, Under My Bubbe's Wings. He is a second generation Holocaust survivor, meaning that his parents were in the Holocaust. And what we're going to do is have a great conversation with Iser. Good morning, Iser.
Good morning.
Iser, tell me a little bit about you before we get started.
Well, I was born in Germany after my parents had married and had been in the DP camp. And they shortly thereafter moved to the US. So my early life was in New Haven, Connecticut. And then at about the fourth grade, my parents moved to LA, where some cousins told us it's a better life. So we moved to the LA area, and then very shortly thereafter, my dad found a good job in San Diego. He's a construction type person. And that's where I grew up, basically, from about the fourth grade through college.
Where in San Diego did you grow up?
East San Diego. We were members of Bet Jacob on 30th Street.
Mm-hmm. North Park, yes?
North Park.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very, very awesome. Iser, when did you write the book?
A couple years ago. My parents, and mainly my dad, told me his stories since I was a little kid. And it was, I could see it was very important to him. He would tell me one tale after another of what had happened to him. My mother talked just very little about it. It was a difficult topic for her. Well, my father told me every detail prolifically. And these stories stuck in my mind. And after my parents had passed and I retired, I had more time on my hands. And my conscience said, I got to write down these stories. They have to be remembered.
Of course, of course. Your cover is really quite incredible. Let's start with your cover. You want to tell me about this?
Yes, it's based a lot on the descriptions my dad told me of the kind of work he was doing. A lot of his work was digging anti-tank trenches for the Nazis, and it was very arduous work. People died constantly. People were beaten to death constantly. And so that image was in my mind. I did find various live photos, black and white photos of similar kinds of scenes, but it didn't quite look exactly the kind of look that I wanted to have, this going towards infinity, kind of an epic scene. So I hired an artist and I described the scene to her. I gave her example pictures and I basically oversaw a custom painting.
What's interesting is when you pick up a book for somebody who's Jewish and you pick up a book and you're holding onto a swastika, you get a feel. You definitely get a feel. And the fact that it brings you in to know what is behind here, knowing that you wrote a book that were stories of your parents. It's interesting, your parents didn't write a book, but you did. And the recollection of how you were able to get these stories out. Your parents have passed, am I correct?
Correct.
Did you feel your parents while you were writing your book?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I felt like they were there guiding me and directing me and being grateful that I did take this effort.
See, when I wrote my book, my mother was still alive. My mother, I thought, was going to pass. So as she was telling me stories from her, I'll say sick bed, because she recovered, of course, but then she passed 5 years from that episode. We knew that the stories were so important and that for us to feel like we've done something right, I'm not going to say that the book I wrote is the greatest book I ever wrote. I'm not going to say that. But I know that documenting and writing about my family was extremely important. With you, you got into some really incredible stories, and just the whole feeling. This is a great book, and I highly recommend this for anybody from junior high on up. Elementary would be a little tough. Am I correct?
Correct.
Correct. So, what do you think is what is the age range that you would see this book being used?
I think you got it right. I think
Okay.
junior high and up, it takes some maturity to kind of stomach. I don't hold anything back in it. I wanted it to be vivid. I wanted it was a sacred duty that I felt. Just I think as you felt when you wrote your book,
Mhm.
it was a sacred duty. I had to tell this. I had to immerse the reader into what was going on. It isn't just some far off story. This is
Mhm.
one of the reasons I chose to use my father's voice. It's told as if my father's telling the story,
Mhm.
and because you're there with him and you see and feel what he sees and feels.
Yeah. And the other thing about what I love about your book is that you can close your eyes and imagine. Just close your eyes and imagine to read. And it's almost like a movie in your own mind, which is what I found. Do you have the book near you, Iser?
Yes, yes.
Would you read me a passage, please? Your
Oh,
favorite passage.
my favorite. I haven't really thought about which would be my favorite, but
Something that
okay.
strikes
I
you.
now I came to me.
I mean, if I were to read it, would have been on page 105 because it relates to me with the fact that you're talking about Blechhammer, Gleiwitz, which is where my grandparents. But this is an interview with you, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Um,
See, my reason for reading was comparing and saying, "Oh my gosh, is there a chance that maybe your father could have caught eyes, or was your mother, or you know what I'm saying?"
right.
You look at these things and you just say to yourself, "Was there a glimpse? Was there something there? Did somebody pass somebody by with a ray of hope?" But I want to hear what page are you going to read from?
I'm on page 43,
Okay.
and I didn't think about it till now, but you're right. This I have to find a favorite section. It's this section, and
Okay.
this takes place after my father and his family had been rounded up into the Warsaw Ghetto. Things were very difficult and bleak, and they had to scrounge for food constantly, looking through garbage cans and so on. And my dad, he was one of 8 kids, but he was like the most ambitious and daredevil among them. He would go through the stores to go outside the ghetto, where there was a better chance to get some food for the family. He would do things like that, and he just took risks and chances. And the family depended on him because he helped keep them fed. And they had a small uh, bag of goodies, jewelry, that kind of thing, that
Mhm.
they were saving for the daughters' dowries, which was in those days was a very important thing. A girl the, the groom expected to get a dowry, or the girl might not find a groom,
Yeah.
and so it was kind of a scary thing to put that in jeopardy. But nevertheless, not my parents, my father's parents trusted him the most because he was so ambitious and uh, took chances, etc. And they put him in charge of the dowry. They said, "Do what you got to do, just keep our family alive."
Mhm.
So
Wow.
then, as time went on, things kept getting worse and worse. And then they had heard that they still had relatives living free in Beijing, for example.
Mhm.
Uh, they were still uncollected, living free. And so my dad's parents decided he and his 2 oldest brothers should get out of the ghetto. Just things were just going downhill, and it looked like a one way trip downhill. So they thought that he and his two older brothers would have a better chance of surviving the war if they got out of there and go towards that town and see if you can find our relatives. Maybe they'll help
Right.
you. So before my dad left the ghetto, after all these struggles and seeing the whole family starving, he said basically the whole family, his parents, 8 kids, had to have one loaf of bread that they shared uh, each day, and that was it. They sliced it up and they weighed them, make sure everybody got an equal piece. So it was a very difficult life. But anyway, just before he left, he was going to give all this dowry back to his father. Uh, so he figured he and his two older brothers could live off the land, whatever they had to do. But his parents and their family, they needed this more. But before he did that, believe it or not, in the middle of the ghetto, every block, people begging and starving to death, dead bodies laying stripped of clothing uh, in the street. And the same street, you could go and find a bakery with with bagels and loaves of bread and cakes and goodies. And there were restaurants also. So on these same streets. So my dad
Now,
took
you know,
a.
you're telling the story, you're not reading it. I wanted you to read because I'm with you on page
Oh, I'll read
44
it.
right
Okay,
now.
I'll read it. So, okay, this is after my dad was ready to leave the ghetto
After
with two
several
older
months of
brothers.
struggling to survive, is that where you're
Exactly.
at? Okay.
Before. Yeah, okay, well, I already told that part. Let's go to the before finally leaving. So when my
Okay.
dad was ready to leave, my dad was ready to leave the ghetto with two brothers, and he was going to leave most of the jewelry with his parents. Page 43 near the bottom. Okay, before finally leaving the ghetto and returning the remaining family nest egg to my father, I decided not to take any with me, hoping we escaping brothers would live off the land. Those remaining behind, trapped in this cesspool, would need it more than we did. However, I decided I must expend some resources with one last costly spree. As things continued to go downhill, none of us knew what fortune awaited us or when our final luck would come to an end. Who knew when and if I would ever see any of them again? Therefore, this is my dad talking,
Right.
remember. Therefore, in a brief, impulsive splurge of satisfaction, I took my youngest sister, Handel, about 7 years old, into a bakery to watch her binge on wonderful things to eat. There were breads, cakes, pastries, goodies of every kind. I got to hold back my tears. Came to the counter and placed a large, heavy, solid gold chain necklace on it as the eyes of the proprietor gleamed. I commanded my sister to eat as much as she could of anything she wanted. I savored the pleasure in her face as her hungry belly filled beyond satisfaction. This image is seared into my memory forever. She continued to eat and eat until she could no longer go on, almost to the point of pain. I needed this last singularly positive image in my mind before escaping the ghetto for good. This was the last I was to see her and the rest of my family who remained there.
What I find, Iser, is that when a teacher talks about the Holocaust and when there are programs that we have throughout the United States, and when you know of these programs that talk about the Holocaust, then at almost any age, could you have somebody maybe not read the whole book, but the fact that even in elementary school, you're talking about a 7-year-old child, Handel, and what had happened. And to, you look at this and you say to yourself, there are passages and things, but it's up to the teacher to read what's important. Just those 2 pages alone are a lesson plan to be able to say to somebody in school, let's say that you're in a situation in a ghetto and you've been starving, and your father takes a gold chain and says to you as a child, what is it that you would want for your so-called last meal? What would it be? And yet he took her into a place where there were sweets, not really knowing what was going on, and and knowing, as he said, that this was a moment that he had to have in his mind. This is extremely powerful. Are we going to read other passages? No, because we want readers to read the book, of course. But the way that you write, it's so warm and it's so inviting. It's one of those things that you want to be in a comfortable setting. You want to be in a place where, as you're reading, you stop and reflect. A lot of times people go through books and they read and they read and they read and they read, and they don't take it in. And I know I got in trouble for saying this once because I said to somebody, your book should be a movie. I got to say it again. This should be a movie. Do you know how many movies I've come upon from people that have been writing books? And it's interesting how history repeats itself, which is what you had mentioned, that it was a big thing for our parents to provide for, how do you say, when our families get married, the silver, the gold,
The launching of a family.
the launching of a family. Mhm. How many times have we opened up something and it was like this beautiful linen, and it's like, Mom, why do you have that linen? When you get married, it's for you when you get married, or I mean, it's what's in our blood.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you had a great picture of that not only do you just talk about what happened, but the feelings that we have.
If you don't mind for a second,
I want to hear.
His sister Handel, we have a picture of her, page 47. It's one of the few pictures of my parents' family that I have ever seen. I was caught a street scene, and he was able to identify his sister. Page 47, I zoomed in, and that's the one that he took into the bakery.
Wow. Wow. Quite something. And yeah, I can see on 46 and then how you zoomed in. Let me see if I'm doing this correctly. See from 46 and then zoom in. Wow. Such incredible documenting. Absolutely incredible documenting. How did your father tell you these stories?
He told in little pieces, little increments. We could be just sitting there watching TV, and he would lower the volume, and he said, that reminds me of something that happened. And then another time we might be driving somewhere, and he would start telling another episode. And many of these episodes he repeated several times, and it stuck in my head.
Did you ever write them down? Did you ever say, I need to record?
No. Okay, what happened is later
That's
in
what
life.
I did.
Yeah, later in life, and when he was already retired and so on, I would sometimes ask questions, fill in some details, fill in some blanks. He also recorded a few things, a few pieces of information, audio.
Mhm.
And also the Shoah Foundation did an interview of him.
Yes.
So he has a Shoah Foundation.
Do you know his Shoah number in case anybody wants to hear this?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can find out about it.
Okay.
I think you can look it up by name also, by his name, David Flaum.
The USC Shoah Foundation, started by Steven Spielberg. It's now run by Stephen Smith, a very dear friend of mine who I absolutely adore. And you can look up different people's testimonies, which are quite amazing. How many times have you watched the testimony?
Well, I actually have a copy of the CD. So
same here. How many times have you watched it?
Oh, not that many times, because I know all the stories. So I watch it a few times. But
sometimes when I want to feel close to my mom, or on a holiday, I'll
Yeah,
sit there and I'll pop it in and I just feel like I'm talking to my mom. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I had one sister, unfortunately, because of health situations. She passed a few years ago.
Mhm. Did you talk to her about anything that your parents went through?
Not really.
Mm.
We just had our brother and sister spats and typical rivalries and this and that.
Mhm.
So, but we didn't really talk too much about that.
Easer, a lot of times people ask me questions when it comes to my book. I'm going to ask you this. Okay. These are just typical questions that I have been given along the way. What made you come up with the title?
Well, I know that the theme of his vision, he had a vision early on, right after his first episode of being working for the Nazis, and the whole his whole gang of people that had been rounded up died of typhoid. He got typhoid too. He and one other guy were not dead yet. Even some of the Germans got sick from it. And this was before concentration camps. This was just conscripted workers. You know, they would grab men off the street
Mhm.
to go do various tasks. So it
Late
wasn't really.
30s, 49.
No, this was like 39,
Yeah, 39. That's what it
39.
is.
Right after the Nazis took over. It
Mhm.
wasn't really a concentration camp, as I said. They just needed workers, some grunt workers. They went into the
I
Jewish
call that
neighborhood.
the invasion, just so you know.
Right, right. And so he was picked up with a bunch of other young men. They were taken to the Russian border because at that time Russia had the other half of Poland.
Mhm.
Germany had made a treaty with Russia. You
Mhm.
take one half, we'll take the other half. But they wanted to have anti-tank trenches between them. So my dad was in a gang of young guys, rounded up, go dig the trenches. As I said, very lousy sanitation conditions.
Correct.
Everybody got sick, typhoid fever, and they all started dying like flies. And it was about a gang of about 50 guys. And and pretty soon they were all dying off. And the Nazis at that time, they weren't there really to. So at that moment, they weren't focused on punishing Jews. They just wanted to get that trench done. But everybody had died off, so they they let him go basically. They said go home. We're done with you because we're getting sick too. And the other guy who got released died very soon. So my dad dragged himself. In fact, they took him to an Air Force base, a German Air Force base. And believe it or not, I'm digressing a little bit.
Mhm.
He says in that Air Force base, the pilots and so on were very jovial and friendly. They were giving him food, trying to help him. And but at that moment, he didn't even want the food. He was in a daze, in a stupor. And but anyway, they just said, okay, get out of here. Just go back to where you came from. We don't need you anymore. So he dragged himself for about 10 miles to a town and just laid down on a bench. And the Jewish family found him and tried to help him. And it happened to be Rosh Hashanah. And the rabbi in the shul interrupted the service and said, we have somebody here who went through some very difficult circumstances. He's not from this town. We want to send him home. Please, everybody, give me some money. We'll put him on a train. And that's what they did. They collected money. They put him on a train. They sent him back to the town where his family had been in a ghetto on the way to Warsaw. He was taken on a train back to them, but he was still very sick. So they put him in a hospital, like a field hospital, that the Germans actually had set up for the Jews and had a Jewish doctor. My dad had worked there before being taken to this digging project. He was a nursing aide. So the doctor knew him and he liked him. He had been a right-hand helper. So he was watching over him. So it was during that period, during this delirium of having typhoid, that a vision came to him that his beloved late Bubbe, his grandma, who he was the favorite of all the grandchildren, and she came to him and told him in this vision, you're going to go through some very difficult times. I'm going to watch out over you, and I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to keep you alive. And then when it's all over, you're going to survive. And then you're going to go to
He really
America.
did this. Wow.
You're going to go to America, and an uncle will give you $50 in your hand. He'll shake your hand, and in his hand will be $50. And then you'll start a new life over there. And after that, he started to awaken from his stupor, and started ranting. And oh yeah, before the end of the vision, she says, I'm going to give you I made you your favorite meal, which is Lakshan Medyoach, chicken noodle soup.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your favorite meal. I'm going to put it under the bed. When you get better and feel better, you can eat it. So after he woke up, he started frantically swishing his hand under the bed, looking for the soup, which it wasn't there. But it turns out that next to his bed was a sick kid, whose parents were feeding him chicken noodle soup. So he probably smelled it, during this vision, and I gave him the idea of the soup in his vision. So, and the doctor came running and asked the people, can you please spare some soup for this guy? He just came back from a work detail. Everybody died. He's the only survivor, and so on. But he said in his delirium, he knocked the soup out of their hands and spilled it on them. He felt bad about it. But anyway, that story, and all during the next years of captivity and harsh treatment and enslavement and near-death escapes, during all those years, he just felt like his Bubbe was there, protecting him and guarding him, as if she was an angel there hovering over him to protect him. It happened time and time again. Luck could have gone one way or it could have gone the other way, and it went in his favor every time, because it only has to go against him once, and that would have ended the story.
Yeah.
So that was like a theme running throughout the whole saga. So I felt like that's going to be the title of the book. He felt like he was under his Bubbe's wings all those years, being protected.
Iser, do you get visions to this day? Your mother and father?
Do I get them?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't get visions.
You don't get visions where you do something and you feel your mother and father? Where you're guided?
No, not really.
See, I do.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I get
My wife is big into that. Every time she finds a penny or a dime, she says, "Oh, it's from my mother."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm not into that, I have to admit.
Okay. Yeah. What I do is I just let it flow. I don't try to stop the feeling. And when I get a vision, it's like, okay, I want to get the beginning, middle, and end of what is going on. And I am very close with my parents in that way. When the going gets tough, I don't feel like I'm alone. When my parents were alive, it's like I could talk to my mother and father, but to this day I do it, but in a different way. And
Sure.
It's just by a feel or a vision or something like that. I'm enjoying talking to you. I feel like, I'm drinking my soda here. It is not wine. I'm drinking my soda and having such a good talk with you. Are you doing a lot of book talks, and are you able to Zoom with other schools and such, so that if some of my education teachers see this episode, which they will because it'll be part of our series, but I want them to know that they can contact you. They can contact me. I can give them your email and such.
If I could go through you, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
And I'm absolutely up to discussing it with people.
All right, teachers, you know how to reach me through my email. And I know that Iser would be more than happy to talk to you. The book is really quite amazing. What I like about it is it's not as long as a book. I mean, when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's about 125, 127 pages with a glossary that makes things easier for you. I really love this book. I really, really do. I think that the fact that you were able to get the story out. There are things that I love about this, like I said, because I was able to compare a lot of my grandfather's experiences with the camps that your parents, I'll say parents, went through. I think it's important for people to visualize, to be able to get a feel of how life was like back then. This is an incredible book. I wonder if one day I'm going to be talking to you again and we're going to hear about a film that has been made.
That'd be great.
I'll be promoting this for sure. I'm going to say it's one of my top 10. Absolutely one of my top 10 books.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Appreciate that.
absolutely. Absolutely. I hope that as we get through this pandemic, that you'll come down and visit me here in beautiful Chula Vista.
I'd
As you
love
know,
to.
we created a Holocaust exhibit of the South Bay Holocaust survivors, which is pretty neat. Do bring a Kleenex because most people that are second generation and even first generation have told me that they reflect on their own family. And I think that's important. Anyway,
I may know some of those people because my parents were in the New Life Club
mhm.
in San Diego. In fact,
Our
my dad,
wonderful New Life Club. Yeah.
my dad was president for a while, and I was in the Junior New Life Club. So all the gang of second generation,
Mhm.
like myself, we all hung around together and went to parties and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they might remember me. In fact, in those days, I was called Izzy. That was my
Izzy.
nickname.
Mhm.
So, and I don't mind if people call me that.
That's great. That's wonderful. Iser, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this. You've added to our education, which is really tremendous. Thank God for our following because things just kind of go around. And you've been just wonderful. Thank you so
I
much.
thank you very much.
And thank you for watching.
Schluckles nicht in die Tatzen, wer wird Tatzen mich schatzen? Oi, oi, Gott ist größer, hat doch gewünscht mein Häuser, die mir sind gegeben, Häuser, wir sind ausgegeben, die wir sind ausgegeben.